Hello and welcome to the Wild Wonder podcast, where we seek to democratize and demystify holistic wellness practices by speaking with today's leading practitioners. Today we have Heathen Witch and Occult Educator, Ash Yezuita. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It is wonderful to be here.
Last we spoke, we were talking about pleasure activism and pleasure magic. But today I really want to touch on the witchy high holidays because you have been recently teaching a class on these holidays. Do you mind explaining how that came about? What was the desire to teach these kind of classes?
Absolutely. So I think that's something that came up to me in my own practice. It was twofold. One, on doing my own work around stepping into educating about occult topics. It's something that I have been so grateful to be able to do through a novel idea. Christina and Alex's incredible, indie bookstore in Philadelphia and South Philly. But something I really wanted to do is push myself more to share the knowledge that I've gained over the 2 decades plus of witch and magical and occult practices I've been doing, but I have always been more on the side of, oh, it's great that I have this knowledge, but really, can I talk about it? Am I the best person to share about this? I mean, I've been doing it a while, but there are people with way more knowledge than me, and I always read these amazing books, and I am still a constant learner. And it was in this past couple of years, kind of taking those little steps into teaching that I thought that this specific topic is something that anchored me in a clear year and would lean in not only to my knowledge of the holiday practices or the sabbats, but also each of the classes are connected to some individual practice. So the one coming up, we're going to be talking about solitary witchcraft and practicing magic in solitude. Last Sabbat was Yule, and we talked about hearth magic and kitchen witchery. So kind of blending this knowledge that I have and trusting myself to see that I can share and impart knowledge while also still, of course, learning both from the people who take my classes, but also the wide world around me. I think I kind of gave myself the permission of, yes, I actually have things to share, and yes, I am worthy of doing this work, which is really important to me, especially if I think about the topics of the holidays. One, there's so many views of witchcraft, and these holidays are primarily focused on Wiccan tradition, and there's a lot of Wiccan people who would say that it's really their practice that are these 8 holidays that I am talking about in the classes, but then there are so many practices in the class we go into. Yes, this is Imbolc, but here is how heathens actually view this, and they don't actually do this. They do something called blank, and they do it this way, and in this folk magic, they do this, and it's been really cool to just leverage both contemporary practice, like how do witches in 2022 celebrate this, and also the long history. Not that I am a historian of all things, but I do love researching and I love knowledge gaining. And so what did these celebrations in ancient Greek or in the Americas pre-colonialism look like? Because these practices have been all over the world, and now what we practice today in contemporary witchcraft is often kind of a sampling, for better and worse. There are really positive parts to that, and then of course there's the decoloniality aspect of making sure you know where your practices come from, because we don't want to take from traditions that aren't ours to take from. But I'm very certain that in 1950 England, the men, primarily men, who founded a lot of these traditions were not thinking about centering decoloniality.
No.
Of their sabbats. So that is something that I thought was a good topic to bring to people, because it allows for so much to be discussed.
Right.
That was a
And
really
I know you mentioned on on our previous talk that you're not that much into lineage. Like you don't feel that someone needs to be born into a lineage in order to practice it. Can you kind of explain that a little bit for those that aren't familiar?
Yeah, sure. So I think that one of the things that is really important is this idea that there are folks who have records and recordings, and their family history is tied to magic. And that is really, really beautiful. And it's so amazing to say. I mean, I was talking to someone recently that's like, yeah, I learned this from my great grandma. And I was like, that's so beautiful that you learned this practice to honor yourself and take care of yourself using plants that grow in your region of the United States from your grandma. Like, I love it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I don't think that you need to have come from a lineage of witches or known magic practitioners or healers in order to tap into your own magical power. And you can make it for yourself. I know a very popular, and sometimes I love this quote, and sometimes I'm like, I get the feedback on it, is, you know, we are the granddaughters of the witches that you couldn't burn. And I'm like, that's so empowering. And at the same time, no, my grandmother was actually a Methodist woman who probably thought really not great things about, you know, pagans. In when she was alive. I mean, she loved me and we loved reading books together. I know I was really close to my grandmother, but in order for us to center our own practice, we can both hold, yep, I decided to pick up this mantle and I'm going to work on the generational stuff, whether or not my great 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 grandma was a witch or a not great person. That's actually something we talked about during Samhain, because ancestor work so often, it's like, but I don't want to work with my ancestor. I know that they were bad people. I'm a white person who is of German and Czech descent, and I'm on settler land. I am a settler colonialist, and I need to recognize that to both practice honestly, do healing work that needs to be done because of my ancestor line, and also move forward in a way that doesn't completely negate the fact that I can step into witchy practices, while also recognizing that a lot of it I'm picking up. I'm picking up and going, what did this look like for people 1,000 years ago? Because that's often what I'm thinking about in heathenry and in pagan practices, is pre-Christian European traditions. Who knows what part of my family practiced that? I certainly will not be able to get that on Ancestry.com. I'm going to need to do a little bit of guesswork and not feel like I'm cut off from it entirely.
So when you work within these, I guess, for lack of a better word, within these themes, what traditions are you generally pulling from?
Yeah.
Or is it more open?
I think for me personally, it is open in the sense that my gods tend to, if I look at my altar right now, I'm like sitting right across from it, I have a lot of different traditions, but the primary tradition that comes out is Nordic and Germanic. Paganism, that's just something that I fell into. I really loved the scholarship around it. I was a person that was very drawn to, wow, we simply will not say that that's the story unless we have some scholar naming that. Sometimes to a point that it's not a fault point for most people by any means. I don't want to belittle it, but there are times when I'm like, I know we don't know the relation between Freya and Frigga, but I'm going to say she's this and she's that, and that feels really good for me and empowering for me to have them separate. And I cannot constantly be on the move of like, oh, the new scholarship says maybe it's this, so change everything you're practicing. But I do know folks who do. They're reconstructionists. So if there is not like proof, anthropological, archaeological proof they don't include it in their magic, they don't include it in their faith, and that's a completely valid way to go. For me, I'm a little more, significantly more open than that, where I think about the mythology and the stories and what those archetypes are. And I love that archetype being in my space. So during our pleasure magic conversation, I am pretty sure I mentioned that Freya is deeply important to me. She's a goddess of sex and death. And yes, we have some stories about her that we know, but there's a lot that we don't.
Right.
And there's that recognition too, and this is the side note bullet point of all of the European practices that we have. A lot of the scholarship that we have is either constantly changing or it was found and written by white men. I am literally reading a book right now called Harlots, Whores, and Hackabouts.
Ooh,
and it talks about
on my list.
Yeah, it is so great so far. And one of the things they talked about was in the Epic of Gilgamesh, when it was found, there was a central character who she was from what we know, a prostitute that was asked to basically tame a wild man. And when this book was the Epic of Gilgamesh, something that a lot of people read in school when it was first published, the archaeologist who found it literally didn't include it because he was so uncomfortable with female sexuality and the empowerment and what does it mean that the woman needed to go and tame the man. Why didn't Gilgamesh just, like, I don't know, take care of that himself with his masculine bravado?
Right.
And so the researcher literally was just like, nope, we're not doing that one. And it wasn't until like 40, 50 years later in like the early 1900s that someone was like, there's 9 lines in this poem that you all cut out. That's important. That's important. It changes what we know.
Right.
But I use that illustration to say the research we have is also, of course, based on culture and structures and what's considered appropriate. A lot of what we know about heathenry is tied literally from a monk, a Christian monk, 500-600 years later is the one who wrote the story. So when we see the big bearded Wodan or Odin, was he a big bearded king of the gods? Maybe that might totally be the leading research, but it also is very Christian God sounding. Man in the sky.
Right.
And so we need to be mindful of where we get this historic record too, because that in itself, I mean, to think through history and the way that we have it is immensely important when it comes to all of this. And all of that, I know this is about the holidays and the sabbats, but all of this thinking and conversation we're having goes into why I thought those classes were both interesting to teach and important to teach, because unpacking where the Wiccan tradition, which did tons of work in order to kind of create these 8 holidays, why?
Right.
How? What did they borrow from? What do we know on the record, and what do we have no idea? I'm also reading another amazing book right now called Blood and Mistletoe by an expert researcher on modern pagan movements, Ronald Hutton. He wrote The Witch. That was his most recent book. And it is literally 46 pages of what we directly know about Druids. So we're thinking all of our Celtic holidays. There's 4. All the cross-border holidays are Celtic.
Okay.
And it's 46 pages of the literature that they know for a fact, and about 500 additional pages on how we then made stuff up based on 46 pages of research.
Yeah, and it's also how do we relate to that too?
Yeah.
I sometimes struggle with, like, does it matter? Does it need to be factual to matter? You know?
Yeah.
So, like, how much of the practice needs to be like, oh, somebody proved that this is how people practiced 1,000 years ago, and how much of it is just, oh, I relate to this in some kind of emotional or spiritual way, and therefore it benefits me, so I don't care.
Yes. And I absolutely love you bringing that up, because that is, at the end of the day, and paired with that, I have so many thoughts here. Knowing a bit of background to just know what we do know and don't know. And then being able to make the wise decision, because I think in so many traditions and for so many young or new witches, I know there's like a movement of calling themselves baby witches. I know some people love that term, some people hate that term. But if you are new and looking for, hey, what am I supposed to do? I mean, as a person who teaches classes, I am happy to educate and talk and share ideas and hear other people's ideas. And at the end of the day, what you said doesn't matter. This feels right to me. I connect with this on a deep level. To be able to trust yourself in that way is so important. And I think a lot of folks, I know, I mean, many moons ago, many moons ago, I had the 365 and a day, year and a day, and I somehow scrapped up the money. I have no idea, because it was very expensive to do the whole thing. Like, I mean, when I was like 15, it felt like $1 billion. Maybe today it wouldn't feel as expensive, but I'm in a very different, very privileged position when it comes to funds now. Like, I can splurge once in a while, like targeted in a smart way. Whereas when I was 15 and trying to be a good witch, I was like, how am I supposed to buy this herb? Like, I can't do 365 years in a day, and I'm trying to do it exactly the way this book told me. And if I mess this up, then I'm not dedicated. I'm not a good witch. I'm not good at magic, and the gods that I already don't even know how I feel about the concept of gods, because I came from an atheist perspective, which is not as common. My family was religious, but they didn't teach me religion, so I just kind of came as a blank slate, kind of.
Yeah, I can feel you on that one. My parents weren't particularly religious, so they just let me pick. But sometimes it makes it more confusing, because you kind of fall into things. Like, I was like really into Catholicism as a child, and my parents were not. And so I was like, this
that's fascinating.
Going to church on Sundays because I felt like it was important to me, until it wasn't. And then that's another thing to reconcile, right?
Right. No, and it's so interesting to see how being able to play in that way, and play, I know some folks would not want so loose of a term to be applied, but to find yourself, to find what works for you. And I think that there is a real gift around the conversation now about, you can find what works for you and just do it. Like, if you want to celebrate the sabbats in very specific ways, and I kind of go into this in the class, I'm like, well, this culture does this, and this culture does this, and this is where we pulled that from, and this is where we pulled that from, that actually took place in July. We just threw it into January because some pope wanted to celebrate this saint. So it's all made up. And if I'm saying it's all made up in a loving way, not in a belittling way, not in an undermining way, then take what you love and discard what you don't love. And then, of course, the grand caveat that I always add is, be sure that you are not disrespecting a practice that's not your own. Like, of course, there are closed practices that you should not appropriate because you feel like, wow, that's super interesting. Like, cool, I'll level with you. That's a really beautiful practice. How about you try something that honors that same notion, but isn't an appropriating, like, cosplaying of a native tradition or hoodoo or voodoo, where you would work with an educator. You would work with a high priestess or high priest to learn those traditions. And so there's also that grace involved of, you can find something like, oh my gosh, like, sun god, yes, I need to do something with this sun god. I saw this amazing event in Peru and I absolutely fell in love, and this just felt so right for me. Cool. Let's talk about other ways that sun gods can manifest and how you can honor the people practicing that now, donating money, funds, kind of really like, this is beautiful, but also not stepping into something that's not your own. I think that can get a little bit funky too.
Kind of with a humble heart and like,
yes, yeah.
That's what I always struggled with in the yoga world many years ago. I was like, okay, so these people did let's say, a weekend training and all of a sudden their name is Ganesh and they have a ponytail. You know what I mean? Like, what?
I'm just saying. I'm just saying.
I was always
I've
so
seen it.
confused. I was
I've
like,
seen it.
okay, Todd from Connecticut, now you're a Ganesh and you have a long ponytail and you worship all these other gods from India. I was like, it's fine if you like. I still chant mantra to Ganesh in the mornings, but I recognize it's not mine, and I hope I did enough scholarship in it to do it in a respectful way.
Yeah. And
And I feel like it's not performative because it's just mine, you know.
I was going to say, there's also something to be said too about outward monetary gain and a personal practice. Like, I am certain that there are some things that I try not to, when I'm thinking of the really big ones, like the white sage, I don't buy white sage. I don't need to. I like to grow my own sage. But I'm sure there are things that people would say, like, oh, well, if you're really heathen, can you just take a god from this other pantheon? And like, I love Persephone, the story of Persephone and Hades. I actually really adore Hades in a lot of ways too. Obviously, there's complexities to that story, but that complexity mirrors a lot of my life experience. So I felt deeply for these two gods. And I know many folks would say that's not the same because it's the Greek pantheon, but I will say that there is a lot of times that I sit and reflect, like, okay, yes, I understand that it's not the exact same of appropriating a living culture, by no means, but I've heard a lot of amazing scholarship and conversation on Egyptian gods and the African diaspora and colonialism and imperialism, and the fact that the reason we know so much about these gods are because white people were really interested in it and pilfered tombs. Like, they desecrated sacred space of the dead. And of course, we know we created paint and had parties in parlors exhuming tombs. And to think of now, of course, yes, the person in 2022 that is interested in the Egyptian pantheon is not the same as the Victorian who is desecrating a mummy. But honoring and recognizing knowledge and how we gain that knowledge is not to say do not do it, but it is to say do research on what it means to bring it into a personal practice, and it might make you view your practice a little bit differently. Not to say discard it, but to have that, this is going to be something that I personally do in the morning. I know that I've researched this. I know that this is important to me, but I'm also not going out and prophetizing. Like, I'm not trying to pretend that I am something that I am not. And in a way too, even in the conversation, to name, and how you just named, this isn't mine, but it's something that's meaningful for me, lends to that acknowledgement of you can find beautiful things that you honor and not at the same time make it your being. We don't need to parade in our being. We can be ourselves. And as observers take in, yeah, this is actually a practice that's really important to me, or a god that's deeply important. And as such, I'm going to make sure that I do some research on what that means. And I try to be very mindful if there is a way for me to, so if it was the Kemetic Egyptian thing, is there an organization in Egypt working to reconstruct? Can I, if I have a little bit of extra money, or if I have a way to, even if I don't have money, can I share that they're doing this? It is free for me to share on my social media, like, hey, these people are doing really amazing scholarship on this. This is worth checking out. If anybody I know has the funds, please donate a couple of dollars to this great work. And you're giving back in a way that I think a lot of folks are just not sure exactly how to navigate that world.
Yeah, it's kind of like spirituality Starbucks. You're like, I'm going to take half of this and mix in this and dash in this and make it mine.
And make it mine. and there's a place where that is okay, so long as you are being mindful. Because I know I have been pulled by things like traditions that I'm just my easy example is Japanese Shinto. I will tell people that I went to Japan, and it is the first time that I actually felt a land spirit connection, because Japan was one of the first places that, just because of where I was traveling, like I very clearly had an opportunity to see how folks taking care of really, really small, super remote shrines were connected to like their livelihood. And I was coming from the United States, the eastern seaboard, I was like, oh, I've never seen this type of experience, and I really get why people do. I wasn't sure on the whole religion thing. I wasn't sure about the whole God thing, but this really speaks to me. And I had to do that work of, and even then I was like, this feels, I don't want to be that person who like eat, pray, loved into understanding, not to belittle it, but how do I do work around, okay, so what does that mean for me going back to the United States? How do I honor the land in my country? Because I was not, as a settler colonialist, not taught how to do that. The native stories are erased or taught at very specific times of the year in very specific ways. And I had a lot of work, and I still have a lot of work to say, wait, this is sacred land to someone, just not any of my people. So how can I recognize those folks, try to give back in small ways, elevate voices? Because this spirituality is not new. I'm not creating something. Actually, I'm returning and trying to learn from old ways of being and like more set ways that were here before my ancestors came.
But maybe that's the connection, because I see witchcraft as very materialistic, not in the negative definition of materialism, but as in everything's right here, right now, what we experience in our bodies and on this earth. And if we're recognizing something about an earth practice that you like, maybe through witchcraft or your own experience of witchcraft, that's what you're doing for yourself here, just within your own dialogue.
Yeah. No, I absolutely love that. It's beautiful. Absolutely.
Because so I want to go back to the actual, what we're supposed to be talking about.
Yes.
is the witchy high holidays.
Yeah.
So if we could circle back. So most of the names you said, the kind of threshold holidays are Celtic, at least the names are. But and what are those?
Yeah, so we have in the year. It's kind of funny to think of it as the so there's the wheel of the year, and there are 8 total. Here we go. There are 8 total. There are the fall, spring, summer, and winter equinoxes, right? So we have our celebration of the first day of spring, first day of winter, first day of fall, and first day of summer. So those 4, which shift a couple of days left or right depending on when that actually happens in the calendar. We now have literally tools in order to determine that. In various traditions, there have been a lot of ways, and we have a lot of monolith structures that show us that ancient people figured out the highest point of the sun or the longest day or shortest day through brilliant technologies that are very different than our computer systems that we now have.
Right.
So I'm thinking a lot of people immediately go to Stonehenge, but there are so many structures literally all across the world that help people determine that. So those are 4. So there's Yule, which is the first day of winter, so late December. Ostera is spring. Litha or Litha is summer, and Mabon is fall. Those holidays tend to actually pull from Heathen or Germanic / Nordic naming conventions, but everybody, it's just such a worldwide global phenomena to talk about the first day of winter or the first day of summer. So there are so many sources out there of cultures doing celebrations for this. Literally on every single continent, I have found celebrations to spring and winter. On most continents, I have found celebrations to spring and fall. And then the cross-quarter holidays, which are basically in between those, are Imbolc, which is coming up February 1st. Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain. Those are all Celtic in their derivation. So Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain. So they tend to be big bonfire festivals. It was really common from what we know, in like Celtic sources that we have. Bonfires were really, really important, whether they were small personal bonfires at home or if they were big kind of community bonfires that we have some information on where in what is now Ireland, or Wales, those are Scotland, that area. But primarily we know that these were the big modern day counties, but this is where people would celebrate, and we have records of this being done.
But the Wheel of the Year as we know it now, it's a fairly recent invention, if I'm not mistaken, right? Like the 50s, yes. 60s maybe?
Yes. So Wiccan practitioners, there are a few folks that have specific, like, haha, you did it. There's one gentleman that I always forget his name, but he's basically the one who named them all. I can look it up. Mm-hmm. Dorian Valenti was considered really important just in terms of her work with Wicca. Gerald Gardner. These are the folks who really were pulling sources. However, we can look that a little bit older. You're looking at the, Hermetic Dawn and Crowley. Like these mm-hmm. folks are also trying to create calendars, but they were not the same calendar. Really, here's the Wheel of the Year came about in the 50s, 60s with mm-hmm. contemporary Wicca. And the calendar follows, and the reason why it's the Wheel of the Year, for listeners that are like, why are we saying this term so much, mm-hmm. is it's supposed to follow two kind of ideas. One is the cycle of the earth, like life and death and rebirth cycle. Mm-hmm. So life, death, and rebirth. And then the other, which is a very Wiccan sounding thing when I say it out loud, and I'm like, that is one that is created, but not a bad thing, is following of a pregnant woman. Mm. So the leading to the birth, literally to the okay, this is the birth, this is the post-birth, this is the pregnancy, this is the swollen belly. And that really, if you think about it, follows what is going on with the earth, the planting of the seed, mm-hmm. the growing, and then the harvesting and the need for recuperation following the final harvest. And that rest before you plant another seed. And that is the way that the holidays tend to go. And even with the magic that you practice for them, that's connected to it. So if this is supposed to be a planting period, Imbolc coming up, mm-hmm. you are thinking about what do you want to grow? What intentions do you have? Mm-hmm. For the classes I make little ritual kits, and one of the ritual kits, I was like, oh, this would be a really great time to do an intention growing. So here's a pot, here's some cute seeds, write your intention on the seed paper and plant it. And then you're going to watch your intention bloom. Whereas when you're getting into the fall, it's, okay, now how are you grateful and thankful for what came to? How can you look at the past and honor, these are the things that came to me? And when you get to Samhain, it's how did your ancestors help that? And Yule really is a resting period. What do you need protection with? You're both looking at the past year and then preparing for the future. So what happened mm-hmm. that maybe you want to do a protection spell for because you want to get ready for the next, because it's a cycle. Mm-hmm. You want to get ready for the next season of planting. So what are you going to take away as a lesson that is going to be really important for you to do protection around, and then you replant your goals and your preparing for the next year.
Well, it also, this way of thinking or meditating on these, on the Wheel of the Year, it kind of makes me think it's pulling us out of this capitalistic need to always create, always manifest more, create, mm-hmm. which is exhausting and impractical, and it's just not how the earth works.
Nope.
So it's kind of like a permission slip to be like, okay, this is a season where you're not doing anything. I kept meditating on the idea during this past season, this is a season to excavate. Let's dig through before we move forward, because if we're constantly moving forward, we end up where we don't want to be, So I think it gives, at least that's what I find in following some of these more earth-based practices. But I'm curious to know what draws you to these practices
Yeah,
or
so
these
I think,
holidays.
yeah, I think what you're saying just really hits it so much for me because I am a person that just wants to go all of the time. I was just saying to two of my friends this morning, like, me and my partner were doing really well, and I just feel like we have hands in every pot right now. Like, what is, and big things, like, what is the big thing for, home buying? What is the big thing for family building? What is the big thing for uh, commitment ceremonies? And you're like, every conversation is like, so what's up? And it's like, whoa, I got to a point these past few days have been really, really rough and filled with like kind of weird anxieties that I don't
Yeah.
normally hold and have. And I finally this morning we were sitting and talking and I was like, we need a pause. Not we need a pause. Like we are
Right.
great. We're so great that we can think of all of these things, but doing basically three of some of the biggest things that people do in their like life, partnered, not partnered, whether it's a friend, romantic partner, it doesn't matter. You're having these conversations with people. It's a big thing.
Yeah.
Wow, let's just enjoy one another. Let's just enjoy what we have right now, and we'll keep, the background's going to keep humming. But let's take a weekend where if we get mail, like, emails from our realtors, we're going to just take a gamble and delete them without opening them, which is hard for me because I'm like, but what if we're passing up the golden opportunity? And it's like, we're not. If it was the golden opportunity, it wouldn't come in an email when I said, I'm creating a boundary.
Right.
And to go back to the question really directly, these holidays really help people when you see them as a whole, really clearly, one, see the connection to what you can do personally, and two, just see how we are removed from nature in so many ways. I say we, I know not everybody is, but so many folks in our hyper-capitalist, hyper-patriarchal, hyper-materialistic, in the owning everything and hoarding of wealth sense, there is a real disconnect. And so it's the grind and it's the hustle and it's just trying to get at anything. Whereas when you're looking at these and you're like, wait a minute, I'm about to celebrate Imbolc, which is literally about like, let me clean my house, let me open the windows and get cold air in because that feels good. Let me sit at my altar and figure out what I want to do with it. What do I want to do with my goals? And let me give myself permission to be lazy, even though you're not. I mean, looking inward and doing spirit work is not laziness, but we relegate it to that because I'm not making money. I'm not profiting.
Right.
And having a clear sense that, yes, of course, listen, it might not be at manifesting time that we find our house, but it does give me a sense of like, hold up, this is the relaxing time. This is hibernation time. This is like we have our stores of food and we are being careful and mindful so we don't run out of them, and we are taking care of each other. We're taking care of our communities. We're checking in. We're making sure everybody's healthy. Do you have enough? Do you need anything from me? We're showing up for people in really deep, meaningful ways. And I'm specifically thinking of this time at Imbolc, but then even moving into the spring and noticing like, okay, let me think what I do want to work on. What is important to me? Because I can't do it all of the time. Do I have one or two really big goals that literally in sound? I was so proud of myself this year because it doesn't happen every year, but when it does happen, I'm like, yes, where I was able to sit during Samhain, during Yule, and really think like, this is what I wanted to do in the spring, and F yes, I did that thing, and I'm going to be shouting it from the rooftops. I want everybody to know how good I'm feeling and how much I've grown because I set a task for myself that wasn't a do every day thing. This was, I mean, my goals in the spring were I went through a divorce in Samhain of 2 years ago, last year now, not 2020. And I wanted to lean into love and I wanted to lean into balancing this idea of independence, which is important, and not meaning that I need to close myself off. And to be able to reflect and see over the whole year, like, oh my gosh, I did that. And I did that because I took moments for me to reflect at every beat. Like every couple of months, it was like, check in. Am I feeling good? Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm feeling good. Oh, I should reach out to this friend. I lost connection with them. And like, I was loving when we were talking every like 3 weeks. Let me text my friend. That actually happened a few days ago where I was like, hold up, check in. I haven't reached out to Kara in a bit. I love talking to Kara. Hold up.
Right.
But being able to do that in a clear way, it really allows you to give yourself permission to focus on you when, of course, there's outside things that are like not going to allow you to focus on you.
Especially in the last 2 years, I feel like I used to be really good about connecting with the earth and not being an anxious person and like really taking my time with things. But when you're constantly surrounded, well, things are coming at us. I don't think any of us had a good 2 years. And then the state of the world and the state of the earth. And then you feel like you have to do something. Well, at least I was feeling like I have to do something all the time, because if I'm not doing something, I don't know what the thought is next, but we're all going to die. Like,
Yeah.
I have to be doing my part. We have to move forward. We can't be stuck here.
Yes.
That level of anxiety I had never experienced before. And it's taken me probably till now to be able to like, okay, the world will not fall apart if I take, 30 minutes in the morning to like check in and see how I'm doing and kind of work on my practices and go deeper into my practices. It'll probably make me a better person, actually, because we're not doing so hot in this other mode.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it is. It's living with acute stress, and there's trauma tied to that, right? So many people have experienced loss or have feared experienced loss. Anybody who had any major life event, I know folks raising children whom their child has never, like, didn't touch their grandparents for months because we needed to all be hyper cautious. We did not know. And now you have these like little 1 and 2 year olds that have no socialization skills. Right. And it's not, parents are doing everything right and the kid is doing everything right. It is just the mode of being in some ways physically disconnected or having to be anxious if you're opting not to be. Or for me, I can speak for me, being anxious when I see people not being anxious about it, where I'm like, no, we all need to be at high alert. What are you doing? What are you doing? And I think that what has been very, very cool, leaning into the sabbats and also moon mat, like it does not have to be the sabbats for listeners who are like, I don't really jive with that idea. Doing a full moon or a new moon ritual, like a once a month or once every 2 months. This is my time that I'm going to give myself. It is really lovely if you have folks that you feel comfortable with. Again, if they're witches, awesome. If they practice spiritually the way that you do, awesome. If they're just a friend who you like to talk to and you decide, hey, can we set up a call every full moon? Like, I'll drink tea. It's not going to be a magic thing because I know that's not what you're into. That's okay. But can we carve out this time for one another? And can we talk about, whatever? It could be a ritual. It could just be, oh, we're going into the Cancer full moon, and that's like deeply into the inner emotions. I'm going to sit with a friend and just be like, how are you feeling? It doesn't need to be a deeper, like, thing. It can be a journal, it can be a ritual, it can be a practice. For the sabbats, there have been many years that I have sat with friends and family that are not into my spiritual practices, but they're cool with me lighting a candle and then telling them a little bit like, yeah, at Imbolc, this is kind of the thing. We talk about Bridget, we talk about, this god or goddess, and she's all about like fertility and the family. And so I'm wondering if we can just spend some time talking about our family feelings, whether that's positive or negative, and like if you're doing this with someone, then like, what about our chosen family? How do we feel with our relationality? So it doesn't need to be, oh, you're picking out the poem that, you know, they wrote in 1952 and you're presenting it under a specific moon, under a specific day, in a specific location. That doesn't jive with many, many people, but sitting and talking about the big themes and maybe framing some activities around those big themes, like, okay, what are your goals? I know New Year's new nothing. Right now, having just started January, like you got through the month. Yes, now we have a little bit more of an idea of 2022. What's something that you want to do this year? Outside of New Year, new you, new body, new
Like improvements.
make money, blah, 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 blah. And I know there are people who live for that calendar and do it really well, so I don't want to disrespect that, but I know personally for me, I don't do New Year intentions. I do a lot of magic at the New Year, but I do not do anything that's like, what am I planning?
No, I feel it, but also I think for me it's just like my rebellious spirit. Like the second I say I'm gonna do this, my whole body is like, no, you're not.
Cute. No.
No.
I will not allow it. No, I totally get that. So yeah, I think that the sabbats can be really beautiful in that way too, just for building connection. And specifically thinking about the last 2 years, what's really nice if you are a person exercising more caution, which I know a lot of us have to go back to, we're ebbing and flowing based on new data, new research, new strains, new reality. All of these things are really easily done via Zoom or via an online platform, or, people will do Discord with friends. Like there's so many ways to connect, and not to add another go and talk on a video, because that could be really straining for people if that's also their work environment. But if they have capacity for it, you can totally do your own stuff.
Well, I like that you said that you could just have it be a moment for connection and it could be really easy, because it reminded me 4 or 5 years ago I was able to do a ritual with my grandmother. It was not my intention. I just was trying to figure out my own magical lineage at the time, and it's changed so much since then. But I realized that her mother was from Galicia, and it's actually Gaelic part of Spain. So I was like, so they must have some kind of ritual around Samhain. So a couple Google searches later, I found the actual ritual, which was very simple, which was essentially some sort of fire water in a clay pot, and you set it on fire, and you essentially honor whoever's died over the year or honor your ancestors, and then you each take a little shot of the fire water, and that was it. And I had no idea that my grandmother even knew about that ritual, but she's like, how did you know that? And I was like, I didn't. I looked it up. She's like, my mom did that. And I was like, and it was this great moment of connection because she never talked about her. Yeah.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Absolutely. I think that the idea of elaborate or having to buy into things is, capitalism, because I try not to sometimes, and sometimes I don't try at all. I'm not trying particularly hard today not to hound on capitalism, but that is part of the issues with Wicca and paganism too, and not Wicca specifically. This is just a blanket statement with paganism. It's similar to what we were talking about before with the idea of decoloniality or recognizing our knowledge gaining practices. A lot of folks will come to Wicca or paganism because they really want to reject the the big three primarily. And it is in rejection to some, like an indoctrination that they grew up with, that they're really uncomfortable with, that can be very patriarchal, and they don't jive with it for those reasons of how it was taught to them and brought to them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really important to also recognize that in paganism, in these ancient cultures, I mean, we got the word patriarchy from one of the cultures that were like, they have goddesses. And I'm like, yeah. They were a slave-owning society. I am speaking of Greece and Rome. Like, they are a slave-owning society that we kind of ritualize in the West as like the great Western thinkers, while primarily completely ignoring cultures that are not tied to Rome and that lineage that did just as amazing things, that were democratized as well, that you learned math, that had the number 0. That's some of the things that I like to jump into, and there are vast amounts of knowledge all over. And the things that we want to push against, it's not to say don't practice this sort of witchcraft because it's tied to patriarchy or it's tied to capitalism, or you have to buy all of these things to do the book correctly, which was something I felt very deeply in my own history. You can do the healing work for yourself. You can reject the notion that you must spend X amount of dollars in order to buy fancy ritual tools.
Right.
You can go get a stick outside.
A rock.
Like, legit. Go down to a creek and you're gonna find a rock, you're gonna find some mud, you're gonna feel the air, and you're gonna be near a body of water. Boom, there's your magic. You don't need to buy a fancy receptacle to hold it. Do it if you want to. My altar is filled with tchotchkes that have been gifted to me, that I have found, that I have curated over decades. I mean, some of them are older than my witchcraft practice because they are gifts from my grandmother that I've put on my altar, which is something she bought me that she liked, and I kept it forever and ever and ever. But you do not need to buy into these practices. They can be inexpensive. They can be simple. And that doesn't make them less than. That doesn't make it so the magic isn't going to work. You can celebrate any of the holidays with nothing. You can bring your body and spirit, and that is all you need to manifest magic. It is so much fun to have all this stuff. Don't get me wrong. I make ritual kits. It's cute to do a thing, have a tactile thing, light the candle. Your magic is just as strong if you don't have that. If you want that because it feels good for you, awesome.
Before we go, what's an awesome way to celebrate Imbolc coming up where you don't need all the tchotchkes and stuff, whether you're a solitary witch, a baby witch, or you're in community?
Yeah, so my biggest suggestion for Imbolc is cleansing and spring cleansing. So I break down in my class the cleansing into 3 parts. There's the spiritual, the psychic, and the physical. And the way that I talk through that is physically, pick a room. If you don't want to do too much, pick a room, pick a space, pick a bookshelf of things that you really love and you just want to dust off because you really love those books and you want to honor those books. Or you have an urn of your family member's ashes and you just want to make sure that you wipe it down with a cleanser because maybe you have it for a while. Cleaning the physical space does not need to cost any money. Decluttering. If you're looking spiritually, you literally can open a window and use that clear air and do some meditation or grounding around opening yourself up, if you work with a deity, to that deity's ideas and practices. If you don't, just to your own mind. Where does your mind wander when you sit and you feel cold winter breeze on your back, or just beautiful warm air, depending where in the world you are.
Would it be, now that you say that, would it be a good time to ask to open up to your guides too? Because I know a lot of people are always asking, like, how do I get in touch with my guides?
Absolutely. It would be a great time. Again, breathing air and just stillness and quietness and like letting the outside be the only thing that moves, trees rustling. I'm in a very busy city. You've probably heard all sorts of honking and things, but
Oh,
I
we
will
have
still
full-on
open up that window.
construction here.
Yep, I will open up that window and just enjoy that. And then in terms of the psychic sort of cleansing, I am a big believer in the bath or the kind of taking time for yourself. So something that I suggest for folks is if you can acquire, you don't need to buy them if you don't want to, but if you can get an essential oil and regular salts, you can make a little salt bath, or you can, buy for inexpensive, lavender salts or a bath bomb. And if you have nothing, that's totally fine. You can grab some lemons. It's actually really popular to get yuzu in Japan and throw yuzu, like full. So in America, we wouldn't get yuzu, but you could get lemons, full lemons, slice them and put them in your bath water. If you don't have a bath, because some of us are not fortunate enough,
Right.
you can get a bowl and get super hot steaming water, and you can do a face steaming as a way to kind of symbolically participate in all of these things, but also that feels really good. I used to do facial steams all the time when I only had a shower. I also know that there are now, if you can afford like the $5-6, which some folks can and some folks can, and it's okay, of course, if you can't. But there are shower steams. You can also get pieces of eucalyptus and like tie it to the shower, and that'll create that same experience.
I used to only have a shower, and I used to tie eucalyptus every year, and I just loved it. It was the best. I was like, everybody needs to know about this.
It is. I am such a zealot about it. I'm like, listen, get a bath, but if you can't get a bath, get some eucalyptus. You do it once, and you are good. Like, it is just so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And that is a really great way to celebrate Imbolc, since Imbolc is so much about the home, the hearth, and you can extend that into the home of your body, right? The hearth of your body, and honoring that part of you. Another really inexpensive thing that folks can do if they want to build intentions is do a little planter situation, or even light your intention in a fire. Safely and carefully. Please make sure you're not, you're using a burn safe item in a safe way. If you're like, I'm in an apartment, and I've had moments where I'm like, I want to do my fire thing. And I was like, no, I'm in an apartment. This is bad. Probably close the window for that. That was error number one, was when I had my beautiful breeze going into paper that was lit on fire. That was not. Everybody was safe and everything was good.
You just gave me the biggest flashback. Talk about baby witch drama. I was 15, and we set, like, I don't even know what we were doing. We just lit a bunch of candles, and then we kind of forgot. And then one of my friends grabbed a blanket to, like, lay down and went across all the candles that landed on the floor. Thank God the whole house didn't catch on fire, but it just, all I remember is there was wax everywhere, and our smart idea was just to, like, cut the carpet.
Oh yeah, try to fix this. No, it is that is peak baby witch drama. That's amazing. I'm glad that everybody was okay. Obviously, it's more amazing because of that. And it is, I remember the time that I needed to this is not the right burn bowl. I need to move it. And my brilliant idea was to lift my burning piece of paper to put it in the burn bowl, as if, it wasn't on fire. And of course it was dropped. It was a whole situation. And so yes, always be safe if you're doing anything with fire, but fire is a really big, even how you explained with the fire water at Samhain, the cross-quarter times are really popular to have bonfires of some kind. So that's another easy way to do that.
I mean, I could keep talking to you. I was gonna ask like 10 more questions, but I won't. I will let you get on with your day and your beautiful kitty. But thank you so much for being here. Before you go, actually, where and when is the next witchy holiday?
Yeah, so on February 1st, we have Imbolc. And if folks are interested in doing the classes through Instagram on a Novel Ideas page, or a Novel Idea /classes, I believe, a novelidea.philly.com/classes. You can find it. It's taking place January 20th at 6 p.m. So they're 3-hour classes where 2 hours lecture style and then an hour is kind of open. What is our plan? What are we going to do? And they're all virtual right now due to, the state of the world.
And they're on Zoom, correct? So you're getting people
Yes.
from across the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
All-
So it's 6
all
p.m.
welcome.
Eastern Standard Time.
Yes.
A novel idea, philly.com/classes.
Yes. And I might email just to give you the super correct link because
Sure.
I don't want to mess that up.
Yeah.
If that's okay, because I'm actually going to do
Yeah,
it right now.
I'll add it to the show notes. And otherwise, where can folks find you?
I am at Fox und UND Flora, so FOXUND FLORA on Instagram. And if folks have any questions, my email is just ashyezuita@gmail.com. So people are free to reach out if they'd like to talk more or have questions about anything that came up. Happily.
Thank you. I hope they take advantage of that. And I want to thank you again for coming on. It's always a pleasure to have you. I hope
This is
we get to
great.
talk about something else next time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm always enjoy conversation with you, and this was really great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a beautiful day, and I'll hope to see you soon. Happy Imbolc if I don't see you.
You as well. Bye.
Bye.